This Zero Now program is brought to you with the support of our founding partners.
So without further ado, love to introduce our very special guest today. First, Dr. Julie Solis from Region 1 Education Service Center. Judy, welcome to the program. We'd love to learn a little bit more about your background and connection to the topic.
Wow, my connection has been a firsthand practitioner as a teacher, experienced some events that really got me focused on safety and the importance of it. And this is way back when, like 43 years ago, a long time ago. But since then, I've just really gotten very involved. I was a campus principal, high school principal that had to deal with some very sensitive issues. And beyond just the safety, beyond guns, beyond that, other issues. And then that became a very pressing when I became a superintendent. And so here I am now in charge, or one of the hats I wear at the regional center, aside from supporting the academics, is really the safety issue and what's gone on in our nation for the past, buku 15 plus years. It's really intensified. And so I'm just vested. I'm a grandma now, so I want to be in the know. So being part of this is really exciting because I wish I had you all around where I could just hear, okay, what are they doing over there? Because a school is a school. And yes, every school has its own culture, but you get ideas from experts. So I'm very honored to be here today.
Thank you, Judy. We're very thrilled that you were part of this. And yeah, and I'm personally, I've learned more in the last 3 years than I have in the last 30 years. Really but hearing from different folks like yourself really helps make those connections and offer new ideas and ways to innovate to make schools safer. Our next guest, Dr. Aaron Skirbin. Hey, Aaron, and we're glad you could join us. I know you're a little under the weather, but glad that you could join us from Allegheny Intermediate Unit in Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Ara. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Aaron Skirbin, Director of Safety and Security at the Allegheny Intermediate Unit. The AIU is one of 29 intermediate units across Pennsylvania, and what we are regional educational support agencies. My journey to this work, my path so far, I've been a social studies teacher and a middle school and high school assistant principal and a high school principal prior to beginning this role about 5 years ago, and I've been working with the IU ever since, and very proud to be involved with Zero now and as a member of the National Council of School Safety Directors. My background in this work is also contributes to work that I do outside of my professional world as a firefighter. I've been a firefighter for about 30 years, so I've combined my experience as a first responder and as a school administrator into the work that I do here at the IU within the schools of Allegheny County, which is where Pittsburgh is located, and also at the state level with the Association of Intermediate Units that work across the state, and as a board member of the Pennsylvania Association of School Resource Officers. And I'm really just excited to be here and honored to be part of this panel this afternoon.
Awesome. Thank you, Aaron. And Aaron is a very strong contributor to the National Council of School Safety Directors, which if you are interested, just go to zeronow.org. You'll see safety directors at the top. But this is really such a great organization of safety directors from around the nation, sharing best practices, working on a certificate program to establish a standard for what's expected from that role, and just doing some amazing work. So appreciate all that work, Aaron. And James Miller, welcome, James. So James is from Arlington Public Schools. James, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and providing a quick background on your background and connection to the topic.
Well, thank you, Ara, and thank you to the Zero Now community for this opportunity to talk about school safety and security. For me, it started 20 years ago. I've been doing security management. First started as I was a Marine for 8 years on active duty, then transitioned over to the U.S. federal government. I spent nearly 9 years as a special agent with the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, helping safeguard our diplomats around the world. And then from there, went over to Amazon. I was an Amazon corporate security manager, helping kind of grow our HQ2 footprint here in Arlington, and then since transitioned in January 2023 to our school system, where I have this incredible and awesome responsibility of safeguarding 29,000 students, 8,000 staff spread across 42 facilities and schools throughout our small county. And with that, it matters to me both professionally and also personally, as I have a 14-year-old inside of our school system, and of course, many friends as well. So thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to the dialogue.
Awesome. Thank you, James. I'm glad you're part of the discussion today, the conversation. And what's interesting, so I mentioned National Council of School Safety Directors. So a couple of weeks ago, or last week, we had a roundtable, and we were discussing this topic. And this is something we're going to plan on doing every single month, taking a topic like this to zero in on. And it was interesting, because you think of emerging threats like, artificial intelligence, first things you think about, gun violence, swatting, cyber, but we heard a lot of stuff more like personnel related. And so we'd love to hear from you. Judy, let's start with you. I mean, what would you, from your perspective, what do you see as the most pressing emerging threat in K through 12 schools today and in the upcoming years? Oh, you're muted here. Oh, Judy, we'll come back to you. Aaron, let's start with you. And from your perspective, what are the biggest emerging threats that you see in your region or even nationally?
Well, as we discussed a little bit yesterday in prep for this, I mean, I think one of the obvious things that jumps off the board is AI. And we've been talking a lot about that for a while, but I think I don't want to take Judy's words from her, but I know this is what we began talking a little bit about was taking that a little bit of a step further and looking at the impact that this has on relationships within schools. Because the bottom line is we are here, we exist to make sure that we are forming strong, appropriate, meaningful relationships with kids. And if you want to have a safe school, that is where you begin. Every time I speak on this topic, regardless of what element of school safety I'm talking about, whether it's threat assessment, emergency planning, the type of equipment you want to purchase, seeking out personnel, it all begins with relationships. And what I fear is that not only do we sometimes miss the forest for the trees, because we're so concerned about, okay, we have to lock our doors, we have to have good camera systems, we have to have access control, we have to have whatever, right? Pick your thing. I could help you do all of that, and you'll have a secure school. I would argue that you do not have a safe school if you are not focusing on the relationships. We can make a prison secure, for example, but it's not what we're going for with a school. So any adult, I don't care your weekend substitute custodian that you're hiring, there has to be some way that we keep the focus on making sure that we are centering on relationships. That weekend substitute custodian, if they don't like kids, they have no business being within a country mile of your school. You need to, through the interview process, identify, does this person like it? Will they interact appropriately with kids? That weekend substitute custodian, if you have events on your campus, they're going to encounter kids when they're working some basketball tournament, volleyball tournament, musical, whatever. Do they have the capacity to be able to be empathetic and interact with them in an appropriate way, and then know how to help them and to get resources to them when they encounter some sort of a challenging or crisis situation? So I think when you couple the challenges that technology places upon us and the constant evolution of that, right? I mean, we could sit here and talk about how that changes. Vaping wasn't a thing until a few years ago. Swatting wasn't a thing until a few years ago. But it's all variations on a theme. Kids are always going to play the cat and mouse game with schools and school officials. That's time immemorial. It's what's the next evolution of that. And when you introduce elements like AI that can take bullying and extrapolate that even farther than it already has gone, if we're not focusing on the relationships, we're never going to be able to peel through those layers and be able to work with kids and families and communities to make sure that we are getting to the heart of the matter and helping to make our schools safe, not just secure.
Absolutely. And I know, Dr. Solis, I know you have some thoughts on this, and now you're unmuted, so this is wonderful.
Yay.
Did you hear?
Aaron, you're right on point. I mean, we shared this idea yesterday, and it really is. It starts with relationships. You can have the best secured doors. You can have your in Texas now we have to have an armed person on staff. You can have all these requirements, and yes, your SOP. But if you don't work on people, little people, big people, you don't work on them, then all the gadgets, the gimmicks, the products, the great products that you have don't matter. It does not matter. And you're right. Everyone needs to be part of the solution, including your community. I mean, you're not going to talk about your vulnerabilities and things like that, or what your particular tactics are, but you're going to talk about the fact that you will have systems and processes and procedures in place. But if you're the only one that knows them, it isn't going to work. I shared a story the other day with you all, and I'll share it with our audience. And this is where my laser focused view on safety heightened. I was a teacher. A parent fainted right in front of me. I tried to hold her. I'm barely 5'1". I tried to hold her and I yell out to someone, dialed 911, because I knew the nurse wasn't available. The gentleman, no offense, gentleman, yelled back at me, "What is the number to 911?" I know it sounds like a joke, but at that moment, I was not a happy camper. And that's when I realized that we really need to talk to our people. And even the students need to know, what are your procedures? If something happens, what type? And I always fought with our main security person in the district. And keep in mind, I was a teacher. Camp, whatever. They would have all these codes. And I said, I'm not a policewoman. When there's an emergency, just tell me, lock your door. Tell me it's time to move. It's time to, come back to the build, whatever it took. And it took a while for me to convince people where I'm from that you've got to keep it simple, but keep it real, because not all of us react the same in an emergency, whether it's a broken arm. I've seen, as a principal, a broken bone come out of the arm of a child that fell off a swing. I've seen so many things and people panic. So Aaron, you're right on point. You can have your locks and your systems, but build those relationships. Not only know your procedures, your practice, and discuss it. Something that worked for me as a superintendent, because my school was very close to a fast-paced country road where a lot of the truckers drove by, and it was just probably 20 yards from the elementary campus. We practiced scenarios of spills, because there was one, practiced where the immigration was taking people through there, and there was a prison down the road, and there was a lot of things. So because of that, you have to know your environment outside of your campus, mine was a district, and know what potential activities could occur. So I actually had tabletop activities that helped, because we did have someone escape one time. And what we were going to do? My staff already knew. Were we perfect? Heck no. But were we more comfortable in dealing with the situation? From the cooks, the cafeteria, our regular substitutes, everyone understood, and our community knew that we were working on being prepared. And that was before we had AI, which now we've introduced in a lot of the work that we've done in my region, because we're very close. We're right at the border, and we have a lot of people coming in and out, and we have to deal with human trafficking. So there's other issues aside from the shootings, right? We have kidnappings. We have, children being taken. I've had to deal with that just a month ago to Mexico, and helping and supporting the districts. We have over 438,000 students that we have to keep safe in my region. And we're all along the Rio Grande, US-Mexico border. So relationships, you've got to know your staff, because I have studied, because of what I do now, different cases of the shootings, mass horrible shootings that we've had in our country. And I see something that is repeated and repeated. Some people think I just think this too much, but there was my opinion, the relationship wasn't there. They didn't have someone to relate to. So they festered and festered and planned, because isn't somebody, all these incidents, they planned what they did. So obviously they had no one to connect with. So build strong relationships, not become an ATM person for a student, or their best buddy or their friend, but become that person that they trust.
Great points. Dr. Skirbin.
Thank you. Yeah, just to kind of piggyback off on that briefly, as we continue to evolve in this field, a comment was made when we were before we began, but by James regarding how a lot of what school safety is, and this idea of it as a field, as a professional discipline, is relatively new. And one thing that I think we have to guard against as we go into that is you introduce more and more folks into education that are not naturally trained educators. We're bringing a lot of law enforcement into this, a lot of other security professionals into this field, which is wonderful. And when you interview those folks and identify folks that really get what it is to work in a school and bring them in, but what we got to keep remembering is that we're there for the kids and involve the kids in that process as much as we can. Find opportunity to make kids feel that they're a part of this, as opposed to something being done to them. Find ways to engage them in producing materials that they're training related, for example, or creating things to share with younger students like social stories on particular drills, and let them deliver that, or at least create them and send the books to an elementary school, for example. Advisory panels to administrators, with one of the topics being school safety, involving them in interview processes where appropriate. That, when we talk about emerging threats, and because what I've tried to think about in terms of this topic is not so much what's fairly obvious, what jumps off the page of us. A lot of, I'm seeing in the panel there in the webinar chat, folks that are directors of safety and security, a lot of folks that are in this world. And so we're all tuning in to kind of what do we see as that thing coming down the road. What I worry about with that is that we miss some of the stuff that's right in front of our noses, and that we not move away from, but kind of, again, forest for the trees. It's about the kids first, foremost, and always. And so we always need to be reminding ourselves that in spite of what's coming next, how do we keep our focus on protecting and engaging them?
No, that's absolutely right. And James, I mean, what are your thoughts on that as far as emerging threats? I know Dr. Solis and Skirvin, talked about the relationship side of things, looking for those things. But from your perspective in Arlington, what do you perceive or experience as emerging threats?
First and foremost, I'll triple down on the relationship point on maintaining healthy and supportive relationships within our schools. Really does help lower our risk. March of this last year, a student reported to an assistant principal that he didn't feel safe, to the point where he actually expressed that he feels as if another student may have a weapon on them. That resulted in immediate action. We went through our good procedures and practices, coordination with our police. We got in front of the student, conducted a search, and removed a gun. And that student had a gun on them throughout the course of the day. We did that in concert alongside police, our administrative staff, and our school security officers. All that happened in a span of about 45 minutes. What it didn't cause is additional unnecessary panic within the school. What it did allow us to do is provide really immediate support to our administrators, and then also support to our students inside that school. Thankfully, within that 45 minutes time frame, because of course this happened just before school was about to dismiss, we were able to successfully dismiss on time. So I bring that up because it really does showcase and highlight the importance of having good procedures in place first and foremost. And Dr. Solis kind of hit on that point, and I know we'll come back to what a systems-based approach would look like for a school system. But moreover, the power of a trusted relationship. If you really want to go into the details of that incident, there's an entire way in which we can look at what led that student. What are the precipitating causes that led that student to bring a weapon into our school? That's a conversation. And I think the other panelists probably are far more qualified to do that diagnosis. My point is that it's because that student had a trust relationship with administrator and our school-based security team that we were able to successfully remove that weapon from that student, and also support the rest of the school and facilitate good school operations the following day.
James, I think you don't give yourself enough credit. I'm not more qualified to answer that question because you answered it yourself. I think it's an important point to draw. Don't overcomplicate this. Some of this just ain't that complicated. I mean, it's complex, but when you really boil it down to it, it's procedures, it's policy, it's building relationships, it's practicing, it's things that we know. There ain't nothing new. It's really just making sure that we build these programs out and understand, what's our goal? How are we best equipped to meet that goal? What are we lacking to do it? It's things like that. I mean, but you hit it on the head. Those procedures and the relationships. And again, you're every bit as qualified as anyone else to do it. And I would say that to the other colleagues on this call as well. Keep it simple. Don't overcomplicate this and make it more than it is. Fundamentally, this is not hard. It's hard to do well. It's sometimes hard to get buy-in. It's sometimes hard to convince people that you have to do certain things because security is inconvenient many times. And that's where it becomes difficult. From an administrator standpoint, and I'm sure Dr. Solis and other administrators on this call would relate to this. In Pennsylvania, we now have requirements for 3 hours of training for all staff every school year. It's a mandated training for all school personnel. That doesn't mean just teachers, counselors, administrators. That means cafeteria workers, if you employ them, bus driver, all of that, right? Where's that 3 hours coming in our professional development calendar? Because it's not like they took something away. You have X amount of hours in a year to do professional development, and oftentimes your collective bargaining agreements dictate how much time is built in there. So where are we finding it? And so there's this tendency to sometimes be checking boxes, which, we know where that leads. So again, as we look at what's coming down the pike, as we look at the challenges that we face, I think it's also important to take a step back and kind of, don't overcomplicate things.
James.
Pulling on that thread of challenges ahead and kind of emerging threats are, I do want to kind of just put together some context. We recognize that our staff really do have a very diverse set of responsibilities, and now it includes student safety, alongside quality teaching, normal school operations, good, healthy community culture, and meeting the expectations of various stakeholders. And this is, frankly, an expansive and chaotic list of responsibilities for our school-based staff and for school systems. What's incredibly important and to ensure that our school systems are equipped to prepare, prevent, and respond to emerging threats and incidences is having good procedures and practices, and also the support staff that are necessary. The professionals there, security professionals, to help craft out the very needs of the school system in response and also a recovery from emerging incidences. It's difficult. And that point about emerging threats is that our threat landscape for K through 12 continues to evolve.
Judy.
Totally correct. And you all said it, using the KISS method. They used to think I was crazy. Keep it simple, stupid. Don't make it complicated, like I told you about all these codes, Rono, and they would say all these things. It's like, no, no, no. Keep it simple, because teachers have the pressure of teaching at a high level. We want them to maintain the rigor. We want them to be there. We want them to prepare lessons. All these things are occurring, and you're right. And now here comes safety. And so it's about practicing and having procedures that are practical. People thought I was silly when my last high school, there was some things that weren't quite right. And it was as simple as safety going up the bleachers. The kids would just all run. We're talking high school, over 1,200 students. They'd run up the bleachers and run down the bleachers. I actually practiced with them, and I made it fun, and I was silly, but I was real with them. So because of that, and James, you said this, those relationships at a middle school, I did have an incident where, because of the relationships, I'm very firm and I believe it, and I've been called old fashioned, and well, the hair might show that, but I do believe in having an advisory period, whatever you choose to call it, but at least a 35-minute period where the teacher really connects with the students. We came up with lessons that dealt with safety, that dealt with just caring, that dealt with self-care, because, mental health, when you asked about what's crisis, yes, we think about threats of physical harm with weapons or knives or whatever it is, but mental health is a problem. And when you said, James, about the shootings and like really going back, or an incident, and reflecting what caused that child to bring this gun. Well, I had that, I don't know, it was a good opportunity. It was a scary opportunity because I'm not that tough. And like I said, I'm barely 5'1", where students, because of the relationship that I had with these middle schoolers, and that school was in the heart of what we call in Spanish colonias, which was infested with little gangs, wannabe gangs, and they're middle schoolers. They think a little different. And they came to tell me that a boy had a handgun in the bathroom. Unfortunately, my security guard, who was 6 foot plus, was scared. and I could see it. He was behind me, and I know it sounds, like it's a comedy show where I'm being dramatic, but that's the reality. And that's when I started shaping and crafting what I needed to do. And those relationships were very critical in practicing and procedures. But the fact that the kids came to me to tell me, I knew that we were on the right track. I escorted the young man, and you're right, James. It was very critical, and I wasn't trained. I just did it. I was a mom, I guess. I, I don't know. It just worked for me, and it's become a lesson that I share with others, where you have to reflect, why did this child bring this handgun? It ruined his life because it was after 9/11, where there was zero tolerance. This kid could have been valedictorian. He could have gone to any university he chose. That's how bright he was. But he was having some issues at home. So what did that tell me as a leader, and for the leaders in the schools that are, when you reflect at why an incident happens, whether it's a fight, whatever it is, any kind of threat or bullying or whatever it is, you've got to go to the heart and got to talk and ask the hard questions and determine what happened. So counselors had a special training for counselors. Now, just recently, my executive director allowed me a year ago to start a mental health and counseling department, which we didn't have. And we served, like I said, almost 450,000 students in our region. And now it's thriving because people are hungry to have someone to talk to, that they're not the only ones experiencing. So those relationships are very critical. So that's what I learned from taking that handgun away, that maybe my way of doing things wasn't so silly. So simple things can mean tremendous, can serve as a tremendous resource at the end, whatever the incident is. But always look back and reflect, because there was something that's going on for a child to bring a handgun or to start bullying or whatever the case may be. So,
What's interesting, Dr. Solis, is that I've heard, the phrase "the most lonely generation" to describe, youth today, and you're ever more connected today with social media, yet there's still that loneliness and lack of real human connection there, which is really a threat. And I want to dive into that a little bit more. But Aaron, I think you had some additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, just briefly, I wanted to follow up on something that James said about the emerging threat landscape and how we're evolving. And I think one of the challenges there, again, in terms of emerging threat, is the idea of looking at as the field evolves, as the work evolves, as the responsibility evolves, where are the qualified professionals coming from to fill the roles? And more importantly, what kind of training do we have to support them? Because we have to approach it from both sides. Folks entering this field from the education side who maybe don't have law enforcement, first responder, emergency management background, but are responsible for this nonetheless. And on the flip side of that, folks emerging from, say, law enforcement or other first responder disciplines coming into this who are not trained educators and have a very difficult time adjusting into the world of education, which is its own unique environment. And until we get to some, states are all across the board. That's why, shameless plug, I think what we're doing with NCSSD in terms of developing those certifications is really important, because at the very least, there's the opportunity there for a national professional standard that not necessarily government recognized, but at least an industry standard that says, hey, here are the things that this job has, that this job is required to do, what you should be engaged with. And I think that as we continue to evolve, more responsibilities, laws change, that's going to be a continued challenge, because the point that all the panelists have made and others in the chat have made as well is that, I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. Conceptually, there's a lot that is fairly simple to this work, but it's very complex. And that complexity is what creates the challenge, and I think will continue to challenge as we go down the road in terms of funding, in terms of training, in terms of finding qualified people that want to be in this work, and in terms of how schools are able to prioritize it. Because if you're a small school, you may not have the ability to do a lot of these things, whereas a larger school system, they have the finances, they have the people, and so on. So I think that really is a future challenge, and mapping it all forward, that we're going to have to look at how we address in the coming years, because it's not going anywhere.
No, great point, Aaron. I just want to remind our participants, if you have questions for Aaron, James, or Judy, please hit the Q&A button, and you could type your question there. And Dr. Solis, I want to go back to you. Let's look, we're talking about, threats that we have today, emerging threats. How do they differ from threats 5, 10 years ago? And somebody mentioned, 25 years since Columbine. How have how have threats changed over that course of time? How are things different today? Did COVID change anything? I mean, what is your perspective?
People want to blame COVID for everything now. Oh no, what the participant said there, Columbine 25 years ago. Obviously, there was some mental issues going on in the mind of this person, but the threats, I think they've been heightened with technology. Technology is our friend, but it can also be our enemy with the bullying. I've had to deal with adults that also do that with other adults. By the way, I do also train school board members and work on that world too. And you see it. Yes, we have the weapons. I mean, that's been going on for a while, but I think people turn a blind eye that social media isn't always a friend. Like you said, people can be on the telephones and doing all these things, but yet they're lonely. I just heard something on national news today that the people that embrace social media and that feel good about it are the older generation, those that are retired because they can connect with family and they see their smiley faces and it makes them feel good, or they plan vacations. But when it comes to a younger generation, far younger than mine, they still don't feel that connectiveness. It's just like a habit. They're on the phone. And so I noticed that someone said in the chat that they've done away with cell phones, and that's something that's going around here in Texas. And, are we going to ban or not ban? And they're allowing the districts to make those choices. But I think that the weapon continues, but really the mental health issue, it's been around. It was like taboo, but yet we need to stand ground and have these opportunities where kids get to talk to other kids, to adults that are trained. A regular academic counselor is not trained to deal with this. I, as an educator, wasn't trained to deal with this, but yet as a leader in a campus, I set up spaces for people to talk and brought in experts, just talk to us about how to see. I used to get pushback when counselors, I would tell them that they had to had to be at cafeteria duty. Well, we aren't safety people. And I said, well, you're beyond safety. I need you to be observant. I need you to see, look at the kids. How are they acting? Is there a kid that's always been bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, now withdrawn? That's what I wanted them to see. And we're talking 20 years ago. But going to, back to your question, do I see it different? No, I think it's been heightened, but the issues have been there. We just tend to pretend that they didn't exist. Those that had mental illness, put them away in a home somewhere, get them out. And reality is, it's here. How are we going to work together to deal with it? And we're working with educators that have never, like you said it, Aaron. I mean, we have the police officers that don't understand our side of the coin, and then you have those in education that may not understand and don't understand the police work. And they think that, you have police officers and sometimes people want to use them as errand boys. And it's like, no, 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 no. We have our roles, but how are we going to merge this so that we can keep everyone in the campus safe? But I think, is it heightened? Maybe it's publicized more and we're talking about it more, but I still see the mental health. Now the social media, going back, trying to narrow my response here, has heightened it, but I don't think, I don't know. I just think that now it's coming to light because, the media publicizes more of the issues and we're not afraid to talk about it. Look at us talking here today.
Exactly. James, please go ahead.
No, I want to kind of continue this thread about emerging threat and how things have potentially changed for the last few years. I think it is important to talk about issues like how AI has weaponized bullying and social media and the ability to do that more broadly and easily. Moreover, I think most recently, what has occurred in the last few years, last year, Gallup and Pew and others have put out some great material on the lack of public trust. So the failure of public trust and lack of public trust in institutions. Schools, for example, are on that poll. And right now they have the lowest ranking in public trust than ever before. How does that impact our work? I'll share an example. When Appalachia High School was targeted in that unfortunate incident, what occurs often after a mass school shooting or national incident, we are flooded with requests for information. And as a parent, I absolutely understand that dialogue. What are we doing? And those questions come up very quickly. What are we doing to safeguard our school system so that we do not have a similar type of school shooting or mass incident? And that's really concerning. It becomes very difficult, a new challenge, and it frankly is a threat in which we have to respond to. It requires us to be more strategic in communications in the ways in which we safeguard a school system. It's about sharing the way in which we develop good security procedures and practices with our staff. We know, and research shows, that when staff feel safe in the workplace, they perform better. We have higher retention rates. Same with students. The research shows that when students feel safe in school, they perform better. Our disciplinary infractions go down. Every metric points in the right direction when students feel safe. So first and foremost, an emerging threat for us is the lack of public trust in our institutions. And our goal is to help educate and strategically communicate the ways in which we safeguard a school system ahead of a national incident.
Aaron.
Yeah, James, I couldn't agree with you more. I think that erosion of public trust in our institutions is something that we don't really fully recognize the impact that it has on our school, or at least on, people think of the erosion of public trust in education in terms of a lack of faith in teachers or the arguments that occur at the school, at the school board level about curriculum and elements of curriculum. But the impact that that has on school safety, I think we're only just beginning to understand. And that's why communication and transparency in the work that we're doing becomes so incredibly important, and being in front of issues and letting parents and families know and our community know what are we doing, and communicating with our staff, because that trust has to be there, and they have to be able to not only understand what we're doing, but also be able to explain those things when they're questioned by parents and members of the community. And likewise, as a parent, these are things that keep me up at night. That whole idea of trust in our institutions is something that I think most folks on this call almost took for granted growing up. It was just something that we did, like the teacher said. And I'm generalizing, I understand that, but by and large, we trusted our institutions. And that has very much dissipated over the years. And I'd add on to that. And I think that's something that we all need to be paying very close attention to, is what happens at the national level with the Department of Education. And this is not a political comment at all. The simple fact of the matter is that, aside from some of the issues voiced during campaigns about what concerns are with the Republican Party, particularly, I guess, with the Department of Education, is that there are a lot of social safety net programs that are there, that funding runs through there. And then there are a lot of resources and support for school safety through REMS-TA, for example, through schoolsafety.gov that exist through the federal Department of Ed. So whatever happens there, whether they get redistributed, reallocated, sent to the states, whatever it is, that's something that will impact school safety that I don't folks have, at least initially, taken consideration of. And again, it's not political. It's just we need to pay attention to that, because whatever happens with it, it's going to impact our work one way or the other. And in some ways we can forecast, and in some ways we don't, because one of my concerns is that where those social safety net programs go, like Title I, like pre-K counts, like Head Start, all those things that come from the federal government, where they're going to go or how they'll be allocated, going forward, will have significant impact from the very top of education down to pre-K.
No, great point. On that note, so Jose asked, and so I'll open this up to either one of you who wants to take this one here. But Jose points out that a few years ago, when many of us were in school, you could bring your rifles and shotguns to school. I know my high school had a rifle club, but things have changed over the last 10 years. And what do either of you have any insights into what has changed, where you have shootings in school, that someone brings a gun to school, it's not used for a rifle club. Most schools don't even have that anymore, obviously. But any perspective on that? Because I know we talked about relationships, right? And what's interesting, even in our roundtable last week and some of the conversations we had online, the whole like, active shooter threat was not considered an emerging threat. But to Jose's point, what from your perspective, what has changed the last 10 plus years, James? Big
So
question.
it's a very interesting point. First and foremost, I was reminded as a high schooler, I grew up in Gillette, Wyoming. We very purposefully had a week at the beginning of November completely off because everyone would know, because our attendance rates would fall so low because everyone would go hunting. So I understand what that was like on a school campus in some sense because it was normal. Fast forward, however, so that was late 1990s. Columbine changed that, frankly, for us. But then fast forward to now, so 25 years later, look, public schools, we have a responsibility to safeguard students. In local parentis really does mean that we accept custody of a student. I very much expect that when my 14-year-old, my eighth grader gets on the bus, he's going to come off the bus, come home, hopefully take a shower and raid the refrigerator. That is normal for me. What is not normal is to see a mass school. What's not normal is to see a school shooting. And even a mass school shooting that hits national attention doesn't fully encapsulate the entirety of school shootings across our entire nation. Over 340 incidences occurred. I don't think I need to go through the entire litany of data for this group. But the K through 12 database continuously shows and highlights that school shootings and gun violence has been on the rise within school campuses for the greater part of the last 6 years. This point about building trust and confidence within our school systems and public trust in our institutions really does kind of go to Dr. Skirvin's point of ensuring that we have the right people in place to help safeguard our schools and also just make changes. Recognize that having a rifle in the back of your truck probably it's not a good idea for that to be on a school campus.
What's
It
interesting,
seems quite pragmatic.
no, exactly, James. And what's interesting, so Doug Snow asked about what your opinion is on cell phone bans in light of Jonathan Haidt's book, The Anxious Generation. But I'm going to give you each of you a chance to unmute if you're interested in answering this one. But I want to tie that into one of the topics that came in from our National Council of School Safety Director roundtable was something that you would not really think of, but utilizing apps like DoorDash or Uber Eats during the school day. Now you think about that, you have the most secure school, doors are locked, but you utilize a tool, and a student or staff member or teacher opens a side door, back door, and instantly tears apart that entire security infrastructure by opening a door like that. Is that something that number one, your thoughts and in your districts, whether it's in Arlington or Pittsburgh or Allegheny area or and your region in Texas, what is your position on cell phones? Because many, especially the last several months, that has been identified as an emerging threat and potential issue. So, Dr. Skerber, we'll start with you. What is your district's or your area's policy on cell phones?
I work with 42 public school districts through the IU and many more parochial schools, charter schools. It's about 50-50 with them on banning and not banning, with more adding to the list, quite frankly. I think what we've seen, a lot of schools, I'll speak to my experience as a principal. We began maybe about 10 or 15 years ago at this point with the bring your own device policy. So we stopped trying to chase phones all the time, which we were doing, and then saying, okay, you can have them, and here are the guardrails under which you can use them. And that went for a while. But then our district moved to one-to-one, where we provided the computers to the students for them to use, and tablets to the younger students. I think that given now that at least in schools where the technology isn't going anywhere, we need to teach kids to use it. We need to teach kids to use it responsibly. We need to look at ways of minimizing distraction now. And the schools in our area that maybe give the computers, which they're controlling, but have banned the phones, they have measurable data to show that discipline has been reduced, They don't have academic data yet because this is the first year that some of them have done it. So they can't say whether it's increased academic performance or not. But in terms of discipline, they've seen instant improvement in terms of issues during the school day involving phones simply because they're out of the kids' hands. That the focus has improved, the building has calmed down, the temperature's been taken down a little bit. So, I would tend to think that if I were still a principal, I would be in favor of such a thing, to be quite honest with you. I know the argument is that, well, what happens in case of a crisis or anything like that? I get that, but there are lots of other ways that communication is done in a crisis. And we have to be more focused on what takes the school to the place we need it to be on a day-to-day basis, and then be prepared to respond to other things. So that's what we've seen in this area.
James, what about Arlington? What is your policy regarding cell phones in Arlington Public Schools?
It's a great question. So right now, this year, we rolled out a cell phone storage pilot program, which incorporates 4 secondary schools that put their cell phones away for the entire school day in a secure storage. Across the school system, our cell phone program very much is mimicked and is very similar to the ways in which we've managed devices previously. We want them away during educational periods. Focusing on emergencies, I've actually had a bit of a change of mind on this topic over the last year. I agree that putting cell phones away throughout the school day does prevent and shows that discipline incidents do go down, and I do look forward to seeing the academic improvements. I'll bring this right back to me. As a parent of a 14-year-old, my son does not have a cell phone. He has an Apple Watch. It's limited. That has been our approach in our family. Inside of a school context in response to an emergency, our procedures are we've changed our tone in the ways in which we've approached how to use a cell phone during a crisis and an emergency. Very specifically, for example, if a lockdown occurs, we have to recognize, and we've seen this before, that our students are going to communicate through text messages and other ways, through text messages to their parents during that lockdown. It's going to happen. Fighting that, I don't think is the right approach, and saying you need to put your device away. That, to me, is not the right approach. Instead, we're big on strategic communications. I want to leverage that communication to our advantage. So therefore, our approach has been, in the immediacy of an emergency, put your devices away, because we want you to pay attention. That's going to keep you safe, that's going to keep your friends safe, and that's going to keep your school safe. That's first and foremost. Put your phones away in the immediate of an emergency. Pay attention. I think we all want that as a parent. During the crisis, after our lockdown procedures have happened, teacher goes through their procedures, the classroom door is locked, the lights out of sight, we follow the SRP model. What our conversation has been like now is utilize that communication utilize their cell phones as a way to which strategically communicate with families. Meaning a teacher will call out 5 students at a time to say, send this text message. You are safe. We are in a lockdown. I will send you more information when I know, when possible. So now it allows us to control the dialogue. I absolutely agree with Aaron in that point of that we don't want a flood of misinformation, especially in the immediacy of an incident. But we also can't prevent this from happening. So what is our point? Our point has been, let's meet in the middle. Let's come up with a strategic communication dialogue that supports our efforts.
Well, I'll tell you, James, I mean, I experienced this firsthand as a parent. I had my son and daughter were both in high school, and they locked down the school and diverted, this was in the morning, diverted students to the middle school. But the thing is, getting out that first communication, the official communication from the school is absolutely critical. We call this a holding message, right? We're aware, like, school is under lockdown, we're investigating the situation, please stand by, more information will follow. Unfortunately, it took almost an hour to get out that first communication. And during the first minutes, students were texting their parents, tweeting, posting on Instagram. Parents were losing their minds, and they're just waiting to hear a word from the school. And at the time, and this was probably 7, 8 years ago. So I think, the policies and protocols have changed a bit since then. But the thing is, rather than waiting until you have all the information confirmed, all the data, if you're going to lock down, if you're going to take any action, let the parents know right away, because the students are going to tell their parents instantly. If they have their phones with them, they're going to be tweeting, texting, you name it.
If you're a school security professional on this call, your number one stakeholder is your school community relations team, your information communication team within your school system absolutely need to be your number one ally.
Well, and that, and we're actually going to be talking about this in February about misinformation, disinformation, because that is a threat. If you're concerned, if there's information that's being circulated that's not accurate, information can be weaponized. Aaron.
Yeah, I get where, I mean, I think this is a fascinating argument because I see both sides. I really do. And at the risk of being called a heretic on this call, I will say that, I want to focus on what I have to deal with every day. We obviously have to prepare for a school shooting. We have to address that, plan for that, train on it, all of that, right? But in reality, I'm sorry, in reality, most educators, the overwhelming majority of educators, are going to go through a 35-year career and not face that. So I'm going to hedge my bet towards how do I take the temperature down to do things that will, in fact, avoid that from being able to occur. Trying to take the temperature down in the building on a daily basis. Because a whole other discussion we could have is my belief that we need to legislate smartphones out of kids' hands until they're like 16 years old. But that's the whole topic for another day. But what I'm getting at is that I, as a principal, I want to look at what am I doing to improve my situation on a day-to-day basis. If God forbid the terrible thing happens, or even if it's something less critical, like we have a power outage and we have to evacuate and reunify because we can't keep operating a school. If it's a non-emergent situation like that, you know what? I could give the phones back to the kids when we're evacuating and let them have that cadence of communication that James is talking about. If schools have not done a cell phone ban, what James said is exactly what I advocate when I teach this stuff, what I want folks to do. But where I come down on this is what's going to do the most good on a daily basis, and that's why I'm not saying people that disagree with me are wrong. I don't mean that. I think there's valid points on both sides of this, but I got to look at it, for me anyway, from the perspective of what am I likely to face, as opposed to what may happen and likely won't over the course of time, even though I'm prepared for it, planning for it, take it seriously and all that stuff. I just think that's just how I kind of look at it. And I think that, Kelly, I want to address this real quick if I could, because Kelly put a question in there about why are we waiting for mandates? And that's a wonderful question, but I think it's exactly why we're all sitting here talking. We're playing catch up on a problem that began at least 25 years ago. And because we only threw stuff at a wall to see what would stick, didn't have cohesion, didn't have organizations like this to try and bring people together to begin to develop this groundswell to get things done. That's why we're where we are. And in some cases, right, wrong, or indifferent, it doesn't happen without a mandate. That in Pennsylvania, that was the case. So, I think we could ask that question, but I think it's more important to acknowledge where we are and do the best that we can to move it forward and to bring all this into some cohesion and some uniformity and some general understanding, and creating this as a truly professional discipline within education, to move the ball forward and prevent events like these from happening and bring it to the theme of what we're talking about, 2-0 now. So it is where we are.
And that's the thing. And I can't believe we're already out of time. I think we just got started. I warned you about this yesterday. Mary did, that time is going to fly by. But I'm going to ask each of you just to share your final thoughts and comments. But that's the thing, Aaron, is that this is that's what we call it, the path to safer schools. You just don't snap your fingers and you're there. It takes time to get there. And there's things that you can do today. We talk about culture. Culture is free. It's absolutely free. Then you've got security, layered security, all these other things. But knowing where to prioritize, where do you start? Because it can be overwhelming if you try to do everything all at once. So where do you start? How do you prioritize? And before we wrap up, would love to get final thoughts and parting thoughts from Dr. Solis. Let's start with you. Any words of wisdom and final thoughts for our participants?
All I can say is that it takes everybody. It takes everybody. And like we said at the very beginning, and we shared yesterday, it's about building those relationships. And you were right. Every building, even within a district, has its own culture. So you have to communicate with all the stakeholders talk about what's priority. When you're talking about cell phones, you know, ban them, don't ban them, lock them up, whatever it is, whatever you choose, whatever works for you. It's important that everybody prioritize what are we here about. And if you start with building those relationships, you're going to see that you say, well, we want our child or our children to be educated, okay, and can they do that if they have this? And you start compromising some things and weeding some things out that will infringe upon the learning, which is possibly the cell phones. But you've got to set up your systems and processes and work together, because it's not a one-man job, and not every building can be, it's not a cookie cutter. It's got to be about your community, school community, and the community around you, and work it through, because some will say no cell phones. I'm from the Rio Grande Valley, and we all learn and we have our licenses, even though now in Texas you don't need it, but you know, some of us carry a license and we carry weapons. And so it depends on your culture and where you're from. So work with your staff, practice, set up your procedures, make them simple, use the KISS method. And remember that you're not alone. This is a wonderful platform. I wish I had this 25 years ago when I had to deal with 911. And you mentioned, Ara, about the communication, and James, you said how quickly to communicate in incidences when you set up your procedures. My experience is you have one person, that is their number one job. As soon as something happens, to communicate. And there's platforms for that, where you can send a voice message and just say, everything's under control, we're assessing, your children are safe, or we're moving them, you know, like your child had to be moved to another building. Don't wait. So be prepared.
Exactly, Dr. Solis. In fact, most mass notification system, you can pre-record and pre-script different scenarios. So you don't need to make a message under duress. Do it in advance, even just a basic message. You know, hey, you know, school's under lockdown, things are under control. We'll be back in touch very short, whatever it is. But you get it.
I dealt with a bomb at a high school when that was a craziness that was going around, how to build a bomb. It was on the internet. And that was the message. It went out quickly. The reunification, parents knew exactly, because we had practice. And even though it was silly, high school, here's this crazy lady practicing when it's 112 degrees outside. It pays off. It pays off.
It does pay off. Thanks, Dr. Solis. James, final thoughts for our participants.
Well, it's hard to kind of put everything we talked about today in context, but what I'm going to share inside the chat are 3 do's and don'ts, which are going to really be more of a actionable steps and model, which builds off the Zero Now pathways. Take an opportunity to do a realistic threat and honest threat and vulnerability assessment. I have said and will continue to say that threat assessment management is the most powerful way that everyone, to pull on Dr. Solis's thread, that everyone can participate in safeguarding a school system. Do develop an emergency management plan, train to that plan, and then execute the plan when emergency happens, and don't recreate the model. Use SRP. And lastly, strategically communicate. We talked about that. It was kind of this last session, is that share your methods to prioritize your efforts and how you safeguard a school system ahead of a national incident, ahead of an incident within your community. That will set you up for success. Feel free to hit me up on the Zero Now community or on LinkedIn. Happy to help wherever I can. And thank you to my fellow colleagues as well on the call on the panel today. And thank you to Zero Now and Ara.
Thanks, James. And I'm sure Mary's going to be posting James's message in the Zero Now community, because after this, because we did not have time to go through all the questions, Dr. Skirvin, Dr. Solis, James, we are going to we invite you to go into the community and answer the questions within the hour. We'll have them posted if Mary doesn't have them ready now. But Dr. Skirvin, final thoughts from you, sir.
Yes, thank you. First, thank you for the invitation to participate. I'm flattered and humbled to be here. A little intimidated, to be honest with you. I'm very grateful for the opportunity. This was great. The one thing I'd like to add to the discussion is just there was a question that I caught back there earlier about, are we getting better or are the threats just the same? I think that's how it was phrased in terms of emerging threats. And I think I actually do, I'm going to end this on a positive note. I actually do think we're getting better. And the reason I think we're getting better is because of communities like this. Because now, we're beginning to learn and pushing the ball forward in the sense that we recognize we're not doing this by ourselves, that it is everybody's responsibility. And we are getting a lot better at communicating that message, I think, to our staffs, to our school communities, and then engaging in communities like this, whether it's Zero Now, NCSSD, or pick your professional organization. There is more of a groundswell now to an understanding of school safety and an engagement with school safety that I think that if we're doing that, it will help us to identify emerging threats sooner and be able to maybe get in front of things instead of playing this constant game of reaction that we have for the last 25 years. And if we could do that, then there is hope and there is opportunity, and there is, I think, a positivity to be taken from this work. We talk about a lot of dark things in this work. The last thing we want to think of is bad things happening to our kids. And by doing things like this, we can take that energy and turn that into a net gain to really make our schools safe so that we could get back to focusing on the things that are most important, and that's educating our kids. So thank you all for my engagement today, for having me here, and for participation, and for my fellow panelists. So thanks very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Aaron, Judy, James, and I think Judy mentioned this too, but that's the DNA, our mantra was there now is together we'll make school safe for good. And that's what we're doing here. So we appreciate it. Let's go to our mind.